Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm joined here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with Peter Wjik. Hopefully I've said that right. I tried to practice a couple of times. So we're going to talk about how the brand built out of music continues to grow and expand its audiences. So Peter, why don't we start with this quick introduction, a little bit about yourself, and then a bit about the brand.
Yeah, so I'm Peter, VP of Marketing for Marshall. Been with the brand for about 5+ years. Come with a background in big global brands and some smaller scale-ups and startups as well. So I've been a little bit all over the place. But yeah, now find myself in a very fortunate position where I get to work on a brand which is very much a legacy brand with very rich history in music, in culture, and yet moving into growth mode through new categories and expanding and stretching the brand into places where the brand not necessarily has been in the past, which is a great fun challenge.
So you describe Marshall as a brand born out of music when we were discussing earlier. So tell us a little bit more about this, its origin.
Well, the origin is, as many legacy brands, has a happenstance kind of birthplace. Jim Marshall was a drum teacher and musician, a jazz drummer actually, who opened a music store in Hanwell in West London, 1960-ish. And as he opened that store, selling drums and what have you, he also got questions about guitar amplification from some of the kids in the area walking into the shop, and bit frustrated with Fenders from the US. They were expensive, couldn't fix them when they broke. And Jim and his son Terry started to modify them and build their own under the Marshall brand. And it turned out that some of those kids walking to the store were Pete Townsend and Richie Blackmore. So then later became legends in their own right, but at the time they were like 15, 16-year-old kids just trying to get the guitars to be louder. And that was really the birthplace of the brand, and it took on its own life, I think. And then Jim went with that and really continued that legacy with listening to the musicians and the artists and the guitarists and what they needed and wanted, and he developed the product based on them.
And for those of you aware of Marshall, when we think about the brand, we think about guitarists and sort of artists standing in front of a stack of Marshall speakers. We think of Guns N' Roses, AC/DC. Two things I have for you, Peter, right? So firstly, how have you fostered that loyal but perhaps more niche audience to grow your business? That's one.
We'll start with there?
I'll start there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Big learning curve for me was understanding, coming from a mass market kind of branding situations where you build brands based on, obviously, what the brand stands for and the attributes, but also on reach, and you have a general message perhaps to connect. When you talk to guitarists, you're talking to a niche audience, and they want very different things from a mass audience, and they're very specific on what they want and need, and not necessarily appreciate advertising, but rather understanding what they get from the product and how it adds to them specifically. And I think the way we really embrace that and still do, and it's the core of the brand, it's the soul, the analog soul part of the screen behind me is very much coming from that. So paying back to that consumer is really, really important. And we do that through really fostering music culture, whether that's through schools, rehearsal spaces, independent venues, through our record label, through our recording studio, and paying back to musicians and talent without necessarily asking for a transaction back. I think that's really how we foster that very core and perhaps the most important part of our audience.
So with that audience in mind, how do you keep the core values of the brand and trying to attract new customers?
Being true to who we are and always being authentic, I think, is the key part for us. It's so... I'm coming from other brands in my background where brands would die to have a music platform as a communication tool. And many ways to do that, you buy yourself into those platforms, whether that's through sponsorship and festivals or what have you. Now I'm working for a brand whose natural habitat is music, and it's the core. It actually creates the noise of music. And I think showing up authentically is increasingly important, because selling out is the worst part of a brand with the roots that we have. So again, it's really showing up in everything that we do with that realness, and also through the partners we choose to work with. So we're actually seen as giving back to the community, which is obviously a strategy for us from a brand perspective, but it's also the right thing to do. Without music, there's no Marshall.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you said that, and you do need to make money as a business. When we were talking, you said without a guitarist, Marshall doesn't exist. But amps are a small percentage of your business. So how do you just like balance brand building with performance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So catering to the niche audience and the guitarists of the world does not drive our business, and certainly not the growth for the future that we expect to deliver as well as a business and to our shareholders. So bridging the gap from that niche and keeping them with the brand, believing in the brand, loving the brand, and bringing them on the journey as we start to attract new consumers who's not necessarily guitar players or musicians at all. And bridging that gap is the biggest challenge for us as we build the growth for the next 60 years and actually deliver the growth that we have the potential to do and the responsibility to do.
And how do you think about consideration when your audience is not in shopper mode? I think we discussed this.
Yeah, it's a big thing for me. Everybody knows about Marshall because you have some kind of relationship to it. You've seen a band on stage or on TV or what have you. But that awareness doesn't necessarily translate into headphones. I would argue it translates to a degree into speakers in your home, because you have your image of Marshall is a big black box that delivers audio. You trust that audio because you've experienced it. And to a degree that translates into a home speaker, because that's a relatively big black box with the same logo on it. You trust. You've built that trust through the years. It doesn't necessarily stretch into, a small little in-ear headphone or even a bigger headphone, because the stretch is a lot longer. So while we have high awareness from a top-of-mind brand perspective, it sits a little bit in one side of the marketplace and the audience minds. But you're looking at category awareness, it's quite low when you move out of amps, somewhat higher in speakers, and very, very small, right? And looking at data and research, when you're considered, and I think the data says if your consideration 3.5 times above the average consideration in your competitive set, you increase the chances of being bought with over 70% at the end of the day. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we translate the awareness from the mother brand, if you like, into category awareness, and from there into consideration before the consumer is in shopper mode, meaning I have a trigger to shop new headphones or shop new speaker. So that we spend a lot of, and I think both speakers spoke about the importance of building that brand equity before you enter shopper mode. So we spend a appropriate amount of time and resources doing that to increase our consideration.
I think the conversation we had around how you balance that as a business, you were saying that it'd be great for the audience to hear about sort of how the CEO, the CFO, it's sort of behind how Marshall is a brand first.
Yeah,
before anything else.
I think it's so important. And I heard a little bit from Three before as well. I don't have to fight internally for getting brand building high on the agenda. I have a CEO. Exactly. I have a CEO who comes from brand side. He's a marketing and brand person in his background. The CFO that understands what brand equity does to the P&L on the bottom line, that building a strong brand drives margins up. And that's the vehicle to deliver growth for our shareholders. So I don't have that fight. That doesn't mean that I can do whatever I want, right? There is and I work very closely with my counterpart in the commercial side of the business. And we have a very clear understanding that there's short-term needs and long-term ambitions, right? And there's a friction between us. There's a lot of respect, and we don't fight. And sometimes he asks me to compromise, and sometimes I ask him for things, to give up things, right? To find that balance. But I find that friction or conversation really, really healthy because it keeps us honest in what we do. But it's never a and or, right? Sorry, it's not an either or, it's an and, right? What do we need to do to deliver this calendar year growth and at the same time set the brand up for the next 5, 10 years? Because that's the real hard part. It's actually relatively easy to meet this year's goals because you can cut a lot of corners and you can spend money just to get a transaction done. But what it does to your brand over time will not build growth. And shareholders are not looking necessarily only for the next year, right? You do that if you incentivized it, and if your bonus is based on the next 12 months, meeting the next 12 months sales goals, you're going to forget about the next 10 years for the brand. And finding that balance and incentivizing the entire organization. Brand is not a marketing thing. Brand is a business thing. And the whole organization needs to be trained on that and understand that we're all building the brand together. And then, yeah, we compromise sometimes to take advantage of opportunities or to meet a short-term goal, but always having the long-term goal in mind while we do so. And then we can accept the compromises.
Couldn't agree more. I think it's quite refreshing. Probably a lot of people envious of the fact you don't have to fight with your CEO.
I've been in the other places where I had to fight for spending money on long-term goals, and I know the struggle. So I'm fortunate, yes.
So with the rise of obviously new channels, especially retail media, how are you thinking about commerce, and how does that fit into your strategy?
I think we look a lot, and US is a good example where the retail space is so consolidated when you're looking at consumer electronics. There's like 4 or 5 retail outlets, and I include Amazon in that. And some of these retailers also built a media house on top of themselves because they realized they can actually make money more than one way, and they had to because retail is tough. And I think it's really important to make sure that any performance of retail-oriented, conversion-driven media has a place, but it needs to be laser focused on. I subscribe a little bit to the 95-5 model from Ehrenberg Bass, right? So I believe it has a place once there is a shopper trigger, right, in the audience mind. When I've decided I'm going to a birthday, I'm thinking about a speaker for my dad or whatever that is, or my headphones broke and I need a new pair of headphones. That's a trigger, right? And that's when retail media or performance media, in essence, has a role to play to convert. Then you start the conversion journey. But I don't favor that over long-term brand building, right? So if I have to cut budgets, I don't cut brand building first. I cut brand building last because I need to come out strong. From whatever reason I have to cut money, if that's a recession or headwinds, I need to come out strong. And history showed time and time again, the brands that spend on brand building when the times are tough are the ones coming out stronger with market share growth when times turn to the positive again. And I subscribe to that.
How's that working? Have you seen some results that kind of helps you validate that with the business?
We see growth. We can argue that we've seen growth significantly over the last 10 years, also organically, because we expanded into new categories and new markets. So it's a combination, right? I think, again, what you spend on expanding your distribution or your marketplaces or organically growing through, filling pipelines of inventory. But you also need to move those products off shelf or you get discounted, right? And to avoid discounting, you need to have a strong brand. Right, and that again drives your margin, so you see growth both on top and bottom line, and that's the goal. Right?
Yeah. Our Nielsen's recent annual marketing report suggests in Europe a lot of marketers are focused on revenue growth, but that clearly is not the case for you. Just going to move on to another topic, which is around this whole sense of social responsibility. I think that's a big topic we discussed about as well. So how does your brand show up with regards to this?
So I touched on it. Showing up in music is extremely important, but we show up specifically in culture and being a natural part of music culture. And we do that in many ways. And as I said, we try to do it without necessarily asking for a transaction back. So whether we look at rehearsal spaces and we make sure that they have proper gear for the kids often to go through and learn how to play, whether that's guitar tutors or music schools. School of Rock is somebody we work with, depending on where you are in the world a little bit. We also have a music studio and record label where we bring in grassroots bands and musicians who don't necessarily have access, right? So a big thing for us is to give people access both to gear and spaces and platforms and stages to express themselves and develop their craft. And we do that as much as we can without asking for a transaction back. So it's not tit for tat. It's like we give, and it's not necessarily monetary give or sponsorship, but it's actually gear and spaces and stages. And that's really, really important to us.
And on money, you don't have an endless pot, as we've discussed. How are you balancing still staying relevant to your loyal audiences, who are very much niche music focused, versus acquiring new customers?
Yeah, so we have loyal customers on both sides of the spectrum. We're talking amps and consumer electronics, and I don't like to split them up because it creates silos in my head, but it's a fact, right? They are a little bit there. And we do this give back, and creating spaces and opportunities for people is really giving back to our loyal brand fans, if you like, wherever they are. And even if it's that putting on performances where we make sure that even the non-musicians can enjoy music and the experiences. And I enjoy doing that, and it's something we need to do, and it's also the core of the brand, as I spoke about, but it doesn't deliver growth. We're a small brand, despite that we look big and loud. We're actually quite small, specifically if you move out of the amps world of things. And our amps business is a very small part of our business. That's not where we make the bulk of our revenue and profits. So we need to attract new consumers in order to get the growth. And we don't get those through musicians. The growth will come from new categories outside of guitar playing. So with not an endless pot of money, we need to transfer the equity and the trust that we have from amplifications, audio quality, into speakers, headphones, and new categories. And today we're launching soundbar. If you need a $1,000 soundbar, we got one for you that kicks ass. You only need one. That's the good news. So we don't have a massive media budget, and obviously we operate in the social media channels like everybody else and all that. But it really speaks to our loyal customers. If they are following you in social media, they are a loyal customer. They are your brand fan, and they're important. And yes, contact cost is lower. Perhaps even converting them to a new product when they're buying the next product is cheaper. But they won't deliver your growth for the simple reason they're not enough of them, right? So it doesn't matter if you get them all to convert one more time, it doesn't matter in the long run because they're just not delivering the growth at scale. So we need to attract new consumers, and doing that is reach. We need to bring our brand and our values and what we stand for, our positioning and our purpose, into the broader space in consumer electronics to attract new consumers. There's no way around it. We will not fuel growth without it.
So Marshall has a strong brand identity, music lovers, right? But in the premium audio market, you've got established giants. So how are you thinking about the competition, just your Apples and
in many facets? We pride ourselves on who we are and our history, and the perception that we have. Even I do believe we need to broaden it a little bit beyond certain music genres, etc., because that's also will attract more consumers. But we are very different in how we approach it. If you look at from product design, for instance, everything we do is loud in the sense of we're the antidote to Scandinavian minimalism or Japanese minimalism. We're proud of that. We're looking at logo. I'm all asking, is it big enough? Can we get more gold in there? Right? We really try to push that and still be tasteful, I would argue our design is fantastic. If you like that kind of design. If you don't, if you like the minimalist from Sonos or Sono, whatever, fine. We don't argue about that. We are who we are, and we don't apologize. And that's also how we stand out, right? So if you're looking at a shelf of 10 different home speakers, you will see that we are the one that stands out from a pure product design perspective. Analog soul is important to us. Our product is extremely digital, but they look and feel analog, and that's on purpose, right? Because we want you to go up and turn a knob. We want you to flick up a speaker and go flonk. We want you to feel and hear it when you touch the product. It's not enough for us. And yes, we have an app that controls every product we have, right? But when you touch the app, if you feel nothing, it's dead. It's digital only. And it's hygiene. It should be there. You can fine-tune it. But even our headphones, you can touch and skip a song, turn the volume up and down. You don't need to pull your phone up. And that is what we mean with standing out, differentiating ourselves from everything we do, from product development into how we communicate and show up.
We spoke about that product obsession. You mentioned the soundbar was delayed a little while because of a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, 3 years it took us to get that thing out. And before that, we discussed it for a year. Because we're coming from this rock and roll attitude. Can we make a soundbar for your TV? Is that rock and roll? And we debated it for quite a while. And what is it if we do it? And what we understood and realized from the consumers that 65% of soundbar users actually uses it to listen to music. So we decided to make a soundbar that is equally perfect for movies and TV watching as it is for listening to music. And surprisingly, no one else does that. You buy a soundbar that's not ours, you'll find it sounding really weird when you play music out of it because it's done for a TV experience. And it's a completely different stereo setup for it. And then again, what's it going to look like? Soundbars, as you know it, are designed to hide in your wallpaper or under your TV. You're not supposed to see it. And we said, fuck it. Ours is going to be loud. It's going to have a big logo on it. It's going to go appropriate amount of gold and brass on it. And you will showcase it and be proud that you bought a Marshall. Or they'll buy something else.
And you spoke about endorsements as well. Recommendations, endorsements. That's a big thing on your mind right now.
Yes, it is. So we obviously work with a lot of musicians, mainly guitarists. And many of them have a, should we say, rebellious attitude. And that's okay, so do we. And it's really important, actually, that we share values with the people that we endorse and endorses us, that we stand on the same value base as a brand, as our endorsers. And again, bridging this gap, so taking a soundbar that's quite far from, a independent punk venue. So how do we bridge that gap, and how do we bring people with us? So we just launched a 5-minute spoof of an MTV Cribs episode together with MTV. We brought the darkness in there, which are hilariously funny, and made a mockumentary Cribs episode where we make fun of ourselves and the artist makes fun of themselves. And that way we bring the artist with us on this journey. And it's very hard to hate on it when the artists do that for us, right? And it's just a matter of us to build credibility and bringing that audio trust with us into new categories.
Absolutely. I think that's all we've got time for, but we will open up for Q&A.
Yeah, Q&A, Gareth.
I love Q&A, so let's go.
So my question is, so I grew up with at a time when everybody at school wanted to be a rock star, like grunge was huge. Then we kind of went straight into Britpop, and everybody wanted to be in little bands. Like small towns were just all the pubs were filled with like little garage bands and these sorts of things. How that scene has changed considerably. Like we don't see bands as part of culture as much as we did back in the 90s. So my question is, how much does generational cultural shifts impact lifetime value, brand loyalty, the opportunity to scale? Because it's, like I grew up in a time when Marshall was everything and everywhere, because that was part of a huge scene. Now that we are in what feels more of a digital age, like how do you kind of return to that scale? And so I'll try and land the plane and figure out what my question actually is. But how do you how does that impact you? Do you know? This is a terrible question, but do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I think there's a couple of different layers to it. I think
that was
there's a music scene, right? So, and we feel it, and I think it's very much a hot topic in the UK and to different degrees in the rest of the world, to be honest, but very much here. I think also a culture, UK's culture is built on live music and that scene, and the independent venues are struggling very often. So we have a specific UK, we are a UK brand. We're very proud of our factory in Milton Keynes and that we still hand make amps, and we invest a lot of money to make sure that we can keep doing that and make it a good, strong business. So we have specifically in UK different programs to support independent venues, rehearsal spaces, as I talked about, and we have a fairly big proportion of the bands that we pull through our studio and our record label are small grassroots UK-based bands. And then we're trying to give them a platform whether we put on shows or we make sure that we help them get the shows that they need. We work a lot with Rough Trade, with a strong partnership with Rough Trade to get our artists through there and any other artists for that matter as well. And try to support the independent venues as much as we can. We can't solve it on our own, and we're also working with some of the lobbying organizations to support them, which is slightly more of a monetary kind of support that we give them. But we do try to show up and really be there, make sure that if there's an independent venue that needs a new backline, we'll give them a backline. If there's rehearsal spaces that needs that, we'll support that. I think that's one layer of it. Generational shifts was the other question I think I heard. And from a loyalty perspective, it doesn't shift so much, but it perhaps gives more pressure for us to build the non-guitarist side of the business. And we are also on a journey to expand music genres, right? We're very associated, especially in the UK, with alternative rock, punk, heavy metal, glam, whatever your preference is, grunge to an extent, even though a little bit more UK, US based. So we're also expanding that to be less sensitive to shifts. And then digital amplification, right? That's also something that categories that we're looking at. How do we move into spaces that are not necessarily a 100-watt valve amp and also into the DJ space. Headphones works for DJs, right? So there's a lot of that we're working on to fuel our growth for the future and enter categories that are, so we are less sensitive. But you're right, it definitely moves back. I think we're seeing a revival of guitar-based music right now. And that's not something we control, but we can definitely fuel it, right?
Okay, I have time for one more question. Right at the back. Okay, I'm coming.
Thank you. Hey, Peter. First of all, congratulations to your product design team. I definitely think they did a brilliant job. Whoever I know who has a Marshall in their home, while they're okay with their smart speaker being hidden in the corner, the Marshall's usually always displayed like a piece of art. So you either love it or hate it, so kudos. I wanted to actually ask, you spoke about most of the growth is going to come from the consumer side, not on the niche. And I was actually curious, from someone being outside of the industry, apart from the speakers, what are the one or two priority areas that you see where growth is going to come from? You mentioned the soundbar, I guess, is one. Where else do you see growth coming from?
Well, I think growth is going to come from everything you can think of in CE, right? But where we are currently strongest is whether it's home speakers or portable speakers, so battery-driven or non, right? That's our strength currently outside of the amp side of the business. Not saying amps is not growing, actually growing quite healthily, but it's such a small piece of the business. So even if we double it, it's still going to be a small part of our business. So it's important to grow it, but there's also a massive vintage. That's a whole different conversation. You know, Marshalls are proudly handed down through generations, and that's also something we're very proud of, but it's also a challenge. Another conversation. So we'll still continue to see growth in the home speaker space. It's going to change a little bit, but we see definitely growth there. Home connectivity is a thing that we can see continuous growth in. Sonos is really a challenge right now, so that's an opportunity for us to move into. But if you're looking for pure numbers, headphones, whether that's over ear or on ear or true wireless, is by far the biggest category out there from a revenue perspective, and we are globally 1.5%. So the opportunity for growth for us there is massive. But as I mentioned, it's also the biggest stretch right now for the brand because it's not a black box. So it's a journey, right? So that's where we need to build category awareness and really fuel that and bring the musicians and the credibility and the trust we have from the music side over. Yes, soundbars, but it's a good, strong market. That's why we're entering it. But there's also other strategic reason to have a soundbar because it also becomes a bit of a hub in your home. So if you want to have other speakers, you can then connect them through your soundbar, and then you're starting to create an ecosystem, even though we're not a closed system. So you can actually connect any other Wi-Fi speaker to our hub. We don't want you to throw away stuff you already bought, right? Then there is party speakers is big, right? There's big. In Asia there are karaoke machines. Very, very, very big market in the Asia region. And then you have, I mentioned, the amp side of the business where we haven't expanded yet is modelers, digital amps in general. And then there is the hybrids that comes back and forth, right? So the short answer is from a pure revenue perspective, the growth that we can fuel the quickest, if you want some kind of a hockey stick on it, is headphones.
All right, give it up for Peter and Inam. Thank you.